everybody to this meeting of the Resources Committee of the Scottish Police Authority. As usual, we're live streaming the public session of this. And if by any chance I drop off the call, Caroline Stewart will step in and chair the meeting until I get reconnected. I'd like to welcome not only the board members and members of the Scottish Police Authority staff, but also those from Police Scotland, and to colleagues from Scottish Government and HMICS who are joining us this morning. In terms of apologies, have we any?
Apologies from Chief Digital Information Officer Andrew Hendry. No other apologies have been received in advance.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest or connections from anybody? No. And could I ask your approval to taking items 4 to 7 in private in accordance with our standing orders? Thank you. And just before moving on, I realised, Tom, my apologies for not welcoming you to your first meeting of the Resources Committee. We're glad to have you with us. Moving on to the minutes and actions from the previous meeting. 2.1, our committee minute from the meeting on the 10th of November. Could I seek your approval to this meeting minute? Thank you. So moving on to the rolling action log, there are 2 items on it. One on officer well-being, which is the follow-up action is really taking onto the People Committee action log. But Katrina, you've got your hand up at this point.
Oh, yes. No, I was just going to comment on that section, and I realised that the action's been closed because it's actually been transferred to the People Committee quite appropriately, and we will be discussing other aspects of the officer overtime in the next item, I believe, this morning.
Yes, quite happy to take it there if that's all right with you.
Of course.
And I suppose actually our approval to close this is subject to just discussing it at item 3.1 anyway this morning. On the second item, business continuity and resilience, this is an item that really arose from business continuity planning for various scenarios, including power outage. Caroline, I think you may have a comment to make on that.
Thanks, Grant. So not to bang on about this too much, but it has been in the press. It has been in the business press, I have to say. Just that some of the European countries have been looking at restricting EV charging just because of the power problems. So that's sort of Switzerland, the Scandinavian countries. So I just wondered if it was something that maybe audit could be looking at from a risk point of view. It's probably more of a risk thing for operations. Thanks.
Thanks, Caroline. I think actually it should certainly be part of ARAC's regular business to check that the business continuity planning is actually working well and is regularly tested.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I'll be happy to close both these items, subject to these follow-on recommendations. Okay, thank you. There haven't been any decisions taken since the last meeting. So that takes us on to section 3, financial monitoring and planning, the period 7 financial monitoring report. And I saw James a minute ago. I certainly see Lynn appearing, and I know David's there as well. Oh, yes, sorry. My screen seems to be sort of moving people around this morning. I don't know quite why. James, would you like to introduce this?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So yeah, period 7 report, not a huge amount of change from any material aspect from what was reported at the Q2 forecast. A little bit of a change in the risk assessment on the revenue budget, but again, that will likely change through to Q3, probably I would think back towards Amber. But with your permission, I would hand over to Lynn, who can take you through some of the highlights of the report. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, James. And over to you, Lynn. You're welcome.
Thank you, Chair.
So this is the period 7 report, as Jane said. So the year-to-date spend is broadly in line with the Q2 forecast, which is forecasting the break-even position by the end of the financial year. So probably the main change since the Q2 forecast is that we've been working with them internally and with the Scottish Government to identify a package of funding to be returned to SG to support the overall aims of public finances in terms of the pressures that we're seeing. So that's really the key element that's changed the risk deliverability around the forecast. So there has been a package of options that's been agreed with the Chief Constable, and these will be finalised through the spring budget revision. So that's between revenue and reform. So like I say, it does increase the challenge of delivering that break-even budget, and that's why it's signposted as moving towards red, but work is ongoing around the Q3 forecast, looking at the other emerging pressures, underspends, etc. in the rounds, and that will be reported back through to committee in February time. So probably the only other thing to say on revenue is that just similar to previous months, the Operation Unicorn costs are considered separately out with the BAU core budget. So we're working again with the Scottish Government around this, obviously, to seek the full reimbursement of these additional costs. So work ongoing around that. In terms of capital, the deliverability remains at green. There is a sort of year-to-date underspend against forecast, but members will be aware that there is a slippage element included in the budget that was over-allocated at the time of the budget approval. So that's not unexpected, and it's in line with expectations. So again, that will be a position that will be closely monitored through Q3 forecast and through to the end of the financial year. And then finally, reform, that's slightly over forecast on a year-to-date basis. The deliverability of reform still remains at red, and that's because of the delays through the accountable officer template from Scottish Government in terms of seeking that approval for the spend. So all information has been provided from to Scottish Government from Police Scotland, and I believe that approval should be imminent. We're just waiting for that final approval from ministers around that, but obviously that increases the risk of deliverability around that the longer that's delayed. So that's probably the key things, just to call out at period 7, as I say, not a huge amount, just really those key things that have impacted the risk of deliverability that will be reviewed as part of Q3.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Just before passing over to other members for questions, could I just ask for clarification on two things? One is the 5 million adjustment that's in para 2.6. Requested the authority to return 5 million of funding. I just want to be clear that these have all been specifically identified. There's nothing that's to be agreed. It's you've got specific things in mind to that.
Yeah, we've looked at that in the rounds, and in terms of the revenue budget, it's one-off elements of our funding, like around the COVID support, where we've over-recovered in income, so we don't need to draw down the funding, or where we're not spending as much as we anticipated this time sort of last year when the budget was set. So just to be clear, it is one-off funding that we're receiving in year. It is not in any way impacting our core revenue budget.
Right, thank you. I just wanted to just clarify that for the record. And secondly, and finally from me, the Operation Unicorn, the timetable for getting that finalised, any indications yet as to when that might be?
So again, discussions are ongoing with the Scottish Government, so we're waiting for final information from them as they liaise with UK Treasury. So I believe UK Treasury are trying to do something through their budget supplementary estimates window, which is sort of this period and into January, which should then hopefully feed into our spring budget revision. So that's expectations, but awaiting final confirmation of that.
Right. Thank you for clarifying the timescale. So opening up to other members for questions. Katrina, I know you had one question on overtime.
Well, yes. I mean, this is sort of ongoing concern of ours, really, isn't it? So thank you for the report, obviously. So we're now about 700 police officers under full complement, and I think that's right. And we've seen increasing pressure on the overtime budget. So I think you've partly answered my question, except in a way it still sounds like it's very much up in the air as to exactly what's going to happen going forward. But do you have a view on the overtime costs and if they're going to keep increasing under those circumstances? And my next question, part of my question is, given that it's going to take a while for officer numbers to recover, do you have a view on how you're going to approach budgeting for overtime costs in 2023 and 24? And finally, I mean, I'll just go through all the parts of my question. And finally, I know that the welfare aspect of the overtime is moving to the People Committee, where obviously but it's of interest to the whole board, the whole welfare aspect of this. And so, do you have any information on how current police officer numbers and the high levels of overtime are impacting on health and well-being? Or have you got any comment to make on that? Thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. David, you had your hand up first. I'm not sure if you responded to that.
Yeah, I'll respond to that, Chair. Thanks for the question, Katrina. Re-officer numbers, we're actually 344 short at the moment as of yesterday. So that's a real availability number. So 344 at the moment. So we've got 16,000, well, as of yesterday, 16,890 officers. So it's not quite as bad as you feared, I think. In terms of overtime going into 23-24, our kind of planning is that the overtime number would be like the core overtime that we planned for this year. The discussions that we're having, this is still in public, isn't it, this session?
Yes, it is.
Right, okay, just double checking what I can say. Our assumption is on the flat cash is that we wouldn't be in a position to provide the kind of quantum of overtime to fill the gap in officer numbers that we've had. So the conversations we're having is, as we roll into the new financial year, whatever the officer number is, we'll allocate a normal quantum of overtime to them, but we won't have the financial resources to provide overtime. So there will be a financial restriction on the overtime. So that's the kind of going in position. Obviously, the budget comes out later today. That will give us a very clear steer on the number, the overall financial number. Obviously, that's overall workforce. So myself and DCC Graham are co-chairing a resource priority group at a strategic level, and we're having discussions about what the new year will look like in the context of this. So 23-24, we're not looking at over providing anything at the moment because of it's not sustainable in the long term. And to your final point about the well-being, the well-being is very actively managed by the resource deployment units in terms of looking at the amount of overtime and then the rest periods that people have, and they manage that at an individual level. So at the moment, although there's a general kind of we've got to be conscious of the well-being, it is actively being managed, and we've got no individual well-being issues brought up to kind of, if you like, strategic level. There's always going to be an ebb and flow of issues at that level, but they're actively managed by line management. So there's no kind of force-wide concern at the moment because it is under active management. So hopefully that provides a little bit of comfort, Katrina. Thank you.
Yeah, can I come back, Chair? Is that
yes, please do.
Yes, thank you. That's actually very interesting and helpful. Thank you. And then I suppose that the next aspect of all this will be the the reduction in the reform programme and how that's going to actually be impacted going forwards. But I see you're saying that you're going to identify that as part of the Q3 forecast. So that's obviously an area of huge interest to us. But thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm trying to get the right order of people having their hands up. Caroline, I think you were next.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, James and Lynn, as always, for a great report. I just want to kind of touch on it's your risk threat, your SWOT kind of piece. Now 1 and 2, grant aid and funding, and the cost of Operation Unicorn. I think you've lightly explained them. But the hard FM contract, I just wanted to sort of touch upon that bit. Sort of, it seems to be running out of what you thought it was going to, which I suspect is down to just the issues that construction as a whole are facing in terms of the supply chains and the prices going up, etc. But I just wondered, you said you've taken steps to mitigate that, and I'm just wondering how can we do that in this kind of environment, I suppose, when costs are escalating out of control? Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. James, do you want to take that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so that question is one that we've been asking ourselves internally and in the context of the budget for next year. It's a real concern. I know David and I were at Tully Allen yesterday to look at the work that's being done around the water systems, and when you just look at the sheer volume and just the sheer underinvestment over decades and the impact that it's having, and you know, has resulted in the headquarters being closed. I mean, the problem is getting more difficult year on year. So, you know, what we're doing at the moment in order to manage the budget is only doing priority 1 and priority 2, health and safety, reactive repair work on things that have broken. There are things that are, you know, we were walking around some of the accommodation blocks where there was the kind of plaster, the paint and the plaster was coming off the wall, but that isn't getting fixed because the thing that caused it was damp that had come from a leaking shower. Now, the leaking shower has been fixed, the damp has been stopped, but the cosmetic stuff can't be done because you don't have the money. And actually, year on year, the pressure is increasing on even just doing the reactive, because I've spoken to Phil Collard about this. Every year is getting harder and harder. You know, we're getting more and more problems, more and more significant problems, and you know, the one we've had this month is, you know, will not be the last of it if we carry on the current trajectory that we're on. So at the moment, the budget kind of planning assumption for next year is that we only do priority 1 and priority 2 again for the full of 23-24, even although we know what that's doing to us just now. But we haven't, you know, we're not going to have the funding to be able to put more money into the FM side of things, other than just to try and manage the inflationary aspect. So there'll be an inflationary increase. I think, Lynn, there's about £2 million or something from memory, I think, that is going into that, but that's only just to stand still on priority 1 and priority 2, and you know, the estate will continue to deteriorate.
Yeah, I think that is the worry, because you've kind of got the double whammy, haven't you, of that backlog maintenance plus then an inflationary environment, and it's having a really knock-on effect. So that is a concern, actually, and it kind of brings into question that whole estates portfolio piece and our whole sort of management of that going forward, because the more you let things go to dilapidation, really, the bigger your problems you sort of store up, and we kind of know that, but it's a tricky one. And I've heard some horrific stories, actually, of other people getting their tenders in for, you know, property maintenance, and the price is just going through the roof. So, you know, it's going to be a continuing concern, but thank you for that. Yeah.
Thanks, Caroline. And certainly, as everybody on the call knows, the Resources Committee are very concerned about estates overall, and we're having an estates workshop at the beginning of February to try and actually understand in more detail than we could possibly do at a committee meeting some of the underlying pressures and some of the challenges, and hopefully some of the solutions in the way forward. Thank you. Alistair, you've got a question from you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thanks very much, you know, to everybody for this report. James, Lynn, David, as always, it provides a huge amount of clarity. And you know, first of all, what I have to say is the way that you're managing this budget within such a complex operating environment and presenting it in this way, where we're looking like, you know, we're going to come pretty close to you know, that break-even point. Still a journey to go. I mean, I think that's credit to the finance team, but wider Police Scotland, because I don't underestimate the complexity of that. I've got a couple of questions, and they really both relate, I suppose. One's revenue, one's capital, to potential operational impact. So, returning £5 million. You've defined, you've explained, sorry, where that's coming from. Chief Constable's approved this, but what is the potential operational impact of returning this £5 million at this moment in time? And then moving forward to my question on capital, which again I'm interested in operational impact. The main slippage appear to be in estates and also an EV infrastructure investment. We've just had some commentary on the challenges of estates. So what's the potential operational impact if we continue with these potential underspends in estates and in electric vehicle infrastructure as we go towards the end of this financial year?
So on the EV infrastructure, we are behind, but we have got a plan in place to try and bring that back that I've been through, and it looks pretty robust to me, and it's basically built on the learning of being an early adopter of this technology and the things that have slowed. There's been a number of issues and hurdles that we've all had to overcome, which we've now built into a plan to get things back on track. So we're confident things will improve, but you're right, we've seen slippage, and the impact of that is that the revenue savings that we would see from having a more efficiently run fleet of electric vehicles that requires less maintenance, they're cheaper to run, then we don't get that benefit as early as we would. But from an operational perspective, we wouldn't be issuing electric vehicles without there being a sufficient amount of charging infrastructure in place, which means that we do have a number of vehicles that we've taken ownership of, but we've not yet registered and deployed, because we're just wanting to make sure that we've got the appropriate level of resilience in the infrastructure network. So what that means is, in the meantime, we continue to run with a higher level of diesel and petrol cars than we would have done had we have got the charging infrastructure out quicker. But as I say, we think by the summer of next year, we will have all the infrastructure out and operational to support 1,000 electric vehicles. So that's the kind of target that we're working towards.
Yeah.
And on your first question, which was in relation to the 5 million, the biggest part of that around the kind of COVID money, I suppose that what it means is that operationally we will be okay unless something happens that was unexpected, because I suppose the money was there to deal with an uncertainty. And like last year, when we did the same thing, we didn't think we would require all of the money, and then we got the Omicron variant of COVID over the kind of Christmas and New Year period and into January, and that then it meant that we ended up having extra cost, and we got that authorised overspend. So I suppose the risk to us is that it's not so much operational, because if something happens, it will be dealt with and responded to. It just then puts us in a difficult financial position. But we're always clear with government that when we're making clear that we can give something up at a moment in time, it's subject to no shocks coming through the system later down the line. So we're doing it based on best information. So I suppose the risk is that there was another COVID variant or something that happened in the new year, and it changed what we thought was going to happen. That's the kind of main point around it, I think.
Yeah, and sorry, Chair, do you mind if I follow
please
up?
continue. Yeah.
And I've also got one further question when I've finished with this. So the other area, 0.9 million, in terms of returning money for reformed resource spending. So if we don't carry out the reform, that's an investment in the long-term future. The estates is an investment in the long-term future. The electric vehicles are an investment in the long-term future. Totally accept and understand the point you're making around COVID and the judgment call on that. But I suppose the concern about not spending this money in areas you'd invested it is the operational impact is not immediately apparent, but it's in the longer term, as finances and the operating environment changes, and it's making the decisions, conscious decisions, in the full light of that is really what I'm looking at here. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So, sorry, Chair. I see that David's came in.
Yes. I was wondering whether James wanted to comment on that, or whether it's straight into David.
I saw David had his hand up, so I was. That's why I hadn't come in.
Right. Okay, David, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Alice. You kind of hit the nail on the head there. if we're getting squeezed on the overall budget, which is mainly people, which is squeezing the officer numbers, as I said at the Parliament, in organisations where you get a squeeze on your physical resource, quite often you offset it with capability improvements. If we get hit on both, then there's nowhere to go. And that's where it starts to run into a degradation of service or a degradation of capability within the service. So we have had conversations with the Scottish Government, and so has the Chief Constable, about capability. And if you ask him, what do I need? It's the money, the funding to continue to improve the capability of Police Scotland. The more we get pressed on our kind of physical resources, if we're standing still or slipping backwards, that's really not a good place to be. So we have made representations about the importance of reform funding, about the importance of maintaining the kind of infrastructure like the estate around our people, because if the pressure comes in, and James and I wandered around the force headquarters, including the kind of college yesterday, and it was woeful, to be honest. The engineers were able to cut into the walls to find out where there's pipes that have been there for donkey's years, and we're going to have to put a significant investment into that. I mean, we've got a 500-person, hotel effectively there, which we're going to have to run to the right standards. We can't scrimp and save the way we've been doing for years and years, because if you continue to avoid proper preventative maintenance, you end up with the sort of problem we've got now, where you've got a wholesale closure of a site, and we've got to get ahead of that. So it is a real concern about the future, about that investment in both providing maintenance to provide an adequate level of infrastructure to support current operations, and to develop our capability to take the pressure off of the physical side of the force, but also to keep pace with the bad guys. They're not having any restrictions on their funding. So that's an issue as well. So you're absolutely right. It is a real concern. Thanks, Alistair.
Yeah, very good point, Alistair.
Yeah, no. Yeah, and and thank you for that. And this is just a comment, because I know we're going to do a deep dive, into estate and that. You could have the same conversation about the state of about the condition of the public estate within local authorities, within health, within the MOD. I saw a story this morning about state of some of the housing that the military are using, fire service. There needs to be, in my view, it'd be interesting to dive as a much more, and I know it's going on, but a much more collective conversation around this. Because individually we are not, the investment I would think very much could involve all those. That's just a comment. Sorry, I've got one more question, Chair, and apologies for hogging this. In paragraph 2.4, it talks about the Scottish Government's approval process in relation to some of this reform spend, and it mentions, there's been a degree of delay in some of the approvals. Could you highlight what has been delayed, and what is the impact of that delay, and has it been resolved now?
Yeah, so a number of delays. The most obvious example, I suppose, is Your Leadership Matters, which is the training programme. Now, that has now been resolved, but what it's meant is just a delay in the start of that. So there's a period of time where the course has to be developed. That's what's starting to happen now. That'll take a number of weeks. So it just means that we've not been able to spend as much as we would have anticipated of that, because it will slip into next year, and then it starts to eat into next year's budget. Another one is an example, and it goes to what you were saying earlier on, was around doing feasibility studies for estates projects, things like the co-locations, and looking at the feasibility around those haven't happened. So the time by which we may be able to do something like another NEDIP on the things that we would have looked at is now being pushed out by another year, and it's another year of a lost opportunity to reduce the public sector estate, as you're talking about. And so it is a bit of a false economy, in that that if you're not investing through the reform budget, you are delaying future benefit for not just the police service, but for other public bodies, particularly where we're looking to do more collaborative work.
Okay, but all the approvals that are required are now in place, and it's delayed, but we move forward.
Yeah, all the approvals that we're anticipating have now been approved, as far as I understand. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Chair. Thanks for the responses, everybody.
Thanks, Alistair. James, yes, I can fully understand the challenge of this, because if you don't get approval at the right time of the year, you don't have enough window to actually deliver what you've requested the funding for. So it's, as we're now sort of well into December, we've really only got three months to go, and that doesn't make it any easier to actually deliver with this delayed approval process, making it even more difficult. Tom, your hand up.
Thanks very much. I really welcome the whole discussion there around facilities management raised by Caroline and others. So I've 2 points in terms of the unexpected pressure on expenditure and revenue. One was the overtime again, and you know the original overtime, core overtime that was established, David and James, was around an established expected FTE, and obviously that drops, and then it spikes to almost double the expenditure. And it's just, how do we get reassurance that the control measures are there? Because at the same time we're reporting efficiency gains through mobile working, for instance, etc., and some of that capacity should be taken up. But to absolutely double the expenditure seems significant. So it's reassurances around those controls. That's the first bit. And coming back to facilities management, if you don't mind, so you can just pick it up, because it's more a comment. But I think we all accept that the position's wholly unsatisfactory, and you've not been able to, because of the financial constraints, give a plan to deal with it. All you've said is you can deal with 1 and 2, and that's it, which is almost like push it into next year. And at the same time, we're describing facility closures. We're describing people who are going to move back into residential accommodation with scarring and walls and all the stuff that goes with that. We've got the risk of further facility closures, and you know what's the impacts for that. Now, so my point is, there's costs associated with that on top of what we're talking about here. You know, if closing Tully Allen, you've had to take temporary accommodation, you've had to move people into external accommodation and additional transport costs. And so where does that additional expenditure come in the plans? So some clarity in that, and is it really a case of go back to the drawing board and, okay, you've given us the immediate response, which is category 1 and 2, but that's not enough. And do we need to create a position around it? Because I don't think we can, as an authority, sit here and say that that's acceptable. It might be where we are, but we've got to explore what the alternatives are and give some options. And you know, the idea, and I take Alistair's point, that this is across the whole public sector actually. But if you start getting mould and walls, and you start getting things that affect health and safety, and you lose capability because of that, that's a wholly different position we're in, and it seems to be that we're on a cliff edge here. So there's 2 points. One about the controls around that additional overtime, but the other one is probably that additional expenditure that's been incurred because of this situation, and is it a realistic position to hold at this time?
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks for the question. So starting with the FM one, then I think what we'll be doing is through the budget setting exercise, there'll be choices around where money goes and how that is managed. And you know, one of the things I've been reflecting on for some time now is that we have been trying to make the case around the level of funding that's required to maintain a 440,000 square metre estate. Now that hasn't resulted in us getting any more money to maintain it, and therefore we're not just standing still. It's getting worse now. I think we need to look at the overall size of the estate. Now, I'm not saying you know what size it needs to be, but just by way of illustration, you know, if we're spending £12 million, say, on facilities management for 440,000 square metres. If we half the estate to 220,000 square metres, we'd still be spending £12 million on maintenance, but you'd be spending twice as much on what you retain. So there is I'm not saying we would ever be halving the estate. I mean, we never would, but if we're probably going to have to start looking at a reduction in the footprint so that we're not spreading the FM resource too thinly over what we've got, because clearly our case that we've continually made for a number of years about trying to get increased amounts of funding so that we can have the right level of maintenance across the estate hasn't worked. So, there are only those two options. The only way you can maintain an estate to an appropriate level is that you're funded for it, or if you're not going to get any more money, then you have to have a smaller estate so that funding isn't being diluted across too many buildings. So that's something I think we'll need to be picking up through the budget discussion. On your first point about controls, I do think overtime is an area that is very well controlled generally across the board. There are significant focus on reporting overtime for budget holders, and whilst we are double what was in the budget, it's still being managed within the overall police officer costs line. So when you look at how much was available for police officer costs, that most of that was for actual 17,234 police officers. It's the fact that we're running so far under is why you've seen such an increase in the overtime, but it's been managed so that it's still within the overall cost envelope that was allocated to police officers. And actually, it will be underspent. When you look at the overall police officer cost for the year, the forecast is a 9 million underspend, which is actually helping support some of the pressure areas we've got in non-pay. So just to give you that reassurance, it's something that the budget holders and the business partners monitor on a monthly basis, and on occasions it gets into weekly. There are of course things that happen that where we have to respond and the money is spent and it's dealt with later, but it's then picked up and managed in the round as we go forward. So I just wanted to give you that assurance that when we go into next year and if we are operating at a new lower number of police officers, we will not be able to see a spike in the overtime budget to compensate for being under. That will just be the number, but I'm confident that we have got the controls to make sure that will be managed next year.
Thanks, James. That's very, very helpful clarification in there. Now, I know that later on today we'll hear the results of what the Deputy First Minister is going to tell us about the budget going forward, and we may have a better feel for what our options are once that's analysed. But it's quite clear from today's discussion that an awful lot of focus needs to go into the whole question of estates and the strategy and what's deliverable. And James, you made a great point about the fact that given the size of the state, the money we allocated for repairs and maintenance doesn't go anywhere near far enough to deal with things. So I think we're all welcoming this deep dive workshop in February to actually have a better understanding of what's in there. Oh, sorry, James, you want to come back in?
Yeah, apologies. Sorry, I've just realised I didn't fully answer Tom's question. The specific point around the cost of the probation is continuing their training off-site. Where that will be funded from is the fact that when we looked at the period 8 position, we're actually even lower on officer numbers in the forecast now for the remainder of the financial year than we thought we had been earlier. So there was enough headroom in the underspending the police officers to pay for it. The reason that decision was taken was we did do a best value calculation around the options of having probationers go into division, but not many being able to be deployed because not having got body armour or the OST training, and then looking at the delay in having those probationers deployable into February, and a knock-on impact if they didn't have that training and there was a delay, which would have actually just put more pressure on even more overtime, because there would have been 300 less probationers coming out to be deployable. When you took all those factors into consideration, the cost of continuing with the training, albeit more expensively, off-site was still a better value option than having, paying the salaries of probationers over the coming weeks that wouldn't be able to be operationally effective, and then the knock-on impact at the back end, which is that it's taken longer for them to be deployable, and therefore putting more pressure on the local policing. and the resultant overtime. So overall, it worked out as the best value decision. But obviously, it's not a place where we should have been, because that I think we've made the point about the underinvestment in the estate.
Thanks, James. And I think the consequentials of not investing are all part of the overall area that we want to just dig deeper into in the estates, because not only are the board members who are on this committee very concerned about it, but I think the entire board are very concerned about the whole question of estate, and so we welcome this further detailed discussion in February. Just in conclusion, I would like to thank, on this item anyway, I'd like to thank Lynn and James for their usual excellent reports and the clarity of not only the information and presentation, but also the way you've responded to questions this morning. But I think that actually reminds me that I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate the team from Police Scotland who won the COP26 Finance Team of the Year at the SIPFA Public Sector Awards quite recently. I think this just illustrates the grip that the finance team here have on all costs coming through, and COP26 was a considerable challenge in itself, but it's just fitted, it beds in very nicely with the overall grip that the finance team at Police Scotland have on our overall finances, which we very much welcome and appreciate. Thank you very much. I think that brings us to the end of, there are no more questions on this